Welcome to Mr. Lang's virtual classroom. I'm Mr. Lang, and today we are going to be going over the origins of the nation, starting with the early settlements here in North America. We're going to be talking about the Europeans that set sail here. We're going to be talking about the Native Americans, again, who they went ahead and in some cases clashed with, in some cases worked with. And we are going to be talking about also Africans coming over and becoming African Americans. So we're going to start with Cristoforo Colombo, right? You know it. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And of course, this really did spark the European exploration of the Americas. Again, Columbus sailed for Spain, and what he does, he lands in the Isles right off of Central America. In fact, he's again, as the story goes, and I'm sure you know, but quick recap, he's really trying to go to India. Problem is, he said, hey, I can go around the other way, faster route. Didn't realize that there was a whole continent in the way called North America, and Central America and South America as well. When he does get there, he goes ahead and, well, doesn't really realize where he is. Then we do see that other explorers reading this journal say, this guy's not in India. Let's see if he did actually go ahead and find a new world. And of course, he's followed by many others after that. Now, he sailed for Spain, even though he himself is Italian. It's Cristoforo Colombo, that's his name. And he's going to be followed by many others here. So he does, eventually we're going to start establishing colonies here in the New World. Now these colonies are essentially an area under control of another country. So typically one that's very distant. Again, in this case, we're going to be looking at Spanish colonies, English colonies, and French colonies. Now they're going to be occupied by settlers from that country as well. So overall, it's actually, for the empires, it's very beneficial to go ahead and set up a colony out here. Problem is, it's not beneficial for the natives that were here, which we'll talk about. So again, we have economic and imperial goals of colonizing. Again, why would you go ahead and take over land that's so far away and have to, pump money into it to keep it going? Why do they want to colonize? Well, each of the three nations we're going to be talking about, Britain, France, and Spain, these three empires are going to, for the most part, have different reasons why they want to go ahead and do that. Again, Britain and France really were into raw materials. Britain really wanted lumber, and they really wanted, France really wanted fur trading, a lot of fur trapping that was going on here. Spain's a little different. Spain wants gold. Gold, and more gold. Spain wants the riches. Nothing less than El Dorado, as they say. They are going to want wealth, power, and prestige, so in religion. So power and prestige, you're going to have essentially this land is what Britain wants. They want the land, they want everything on it. Same with France, and, well, as long as there's gold, same with Spain. Again, empires back then were really, more or less, depending how much land they had, how big their empire was, really is what they were trying to do. Grow their empire, more land, bigger empire. And then you have religion. Again, for the British here, we're going to talk about the Pilgrims and Puritans. They're going to want religious freedom from England, for the most part. France is going to be more into converting people to Catholicism. And of course, Spain is going to be similar in that they're going to establish missionaries to do the same thing, to go ahead and convert natives against their will to Catholicism. And as you can see, the Spanish, the French, the British, the Portuguese, they're going to hold most of the Americas. We're U.S. history, so we're going to be looking at specifically the British here. However, yes, there are other nations that went ahead and also started to colonize the New World. So we got to talk about the first colony here, first British colony, Jamestown. Jamestown is a very interesting endeavor for sure. It's the first permanent English settlement here in America. And these pictures were taken there. I've gone to, so you'll see a couple of pictures here. I've gone to Jamestown, so you'll see right there. In fact, this is where, very famously, John Rolfe and Pocahontas got married, right there. So it's pretty cool. It's going to be founded by the Virginia Company. Again, you got to think it's all about money. It's all about money. And that's what the Virginia Company wants. They want to make more money. So at the end of the day, they say, hey, we're going to go ahead. We're going to fund this exploration to go ahead and colonize this this colony, Jamestown, in America. Problem is they were ill prepared for this. They didn't bring anything that they should have. They didn't bring products to grow food. They didn't bring a lot of cattle and so on. Instead, they brought more stuff to test for gold test kits. They brought stuff for to go ahead and dig for gold. So they were ill prepared. They thought they were going to find gold, and they weren't. They're nope. They're going to nearly starve to death. In fact, they go through what they call the starving time, which is pretty horrific. What happens there? It's a horrible location, to be honest, what they picked. It's right in the heart of the Powhatan Confederacy. It's kind of ridiculous because they're really going to go ahead and start to settle right next to a Native American tribe that has been there for ages, generations upon generations. And again, they're not going to be taken very. There are going to be some good relations at first, but they are going to break down, unfortunately. Now, this still is an active archaeology site today. It's incredible to see what they're discovering more stuff, more about the lives of the people there, as well as, really what, telling more of the actual story of Jamestown. It's incredible. So, how can we talk about Jamestown without talking about Captain John Smith, right? This guy. Again, he is one of the most famous people, really because of Pocahontas, the Disney film. But he was instrumental in going ahead and making Jamestown really be successful. They were all a bunch of lazy bums, to put it bluntly. They didn't want to work, and they brought all this test kits for gold and stuff, and so they didn't really have, the stuff they needed to go ahead and survive. And neither did they want it. They didn't want to do it either. So John Smith goes ahead, which they hated him, by the way. Like, the colonists hated him because he was so strict. He basically got Jamestown to work by saying, no work, no food. And so, of course, they had to work. They wanted to eat. Now, the real John Smith's pictured here. However, this is probably what the real John Smith wished he looked like, which is, of course, how Disney depicts him in the film Pocahontas. Very, very different, right? Very different. Now, he's going to essentially keep Jamestown from going under, thank goodness, in that first pivotal year, for sure. Now, John Rolfe is going to be another colonist. He's going to be very much in tobacco growing. In fact, he's going to also be very instrumental in making Jamestown also continue. He is going to marry Pocahontas, famously, right? We all think it's John Smith, but it's not. It was John Rolfe that went ahead and married Pocahontas, who was the daughter of the Native American chief Powhatan. So again, there you go. Introduced growing tobacco to Jamestown. He's in fact going to see that the climate's perfect to grow tobacco, and he's going to go ahead and do that. And yeah, it's going to be a huge, huge cash crop for the colony. It's going to keep the colony going for sure. He's going to make a huge profit selling tobacco to England. And because of that, England, the king loves that money coming in, and he doesn't want that to stop. So he's going to keep Jamestown going, that's for sure. So he does go ahead and marry Pocahontas. Now, Disney lied to you. Just saying, hashtag Illuminati confirmed. Just saying, there's a reason. There's got to be a reason. Illuminati knows. So let's talk about Pocahontas. She's incredible. She really is. What unfortunately happens is, although John Rolfe does go ahead and marry Pocahontas, the daughter of the Powhatan chief, she was actually kidnapped. Which they don't really tell you that in the Disney movie. But she was actually technically kidnapped. And that's when she met John Rolfe, because the geniuses that were the Jamestown colonists were like, hey, let's go ahead and strong-arm the chief by kidnapping his favorite daughter. And the response of the chief was, whatever. Like, they were like, oh, well, that backfired. And so because of that, she does actually kind of immerse herself into the Western culture. Now, there is stories that she may have kept John Smith from being killed by her father. Very famous, as you can see by the picture on the top right. Nothing's confirmed. For the most part, we see it show up a couple times in a couple different journals, but essentially, nothing's confirmed. So it's hard to say if that's true or not. Again, married John Rolfe. She's going to be baptized a Christian. She unfortunately leads a very short life. She's going to be taken to England in 1616, becomes definitely a huge celebrity because, again, this is a Native American woman here, someone you don't see every day walking the streets of England. And she unfortunately dies on a return trip to Jamestown at age 22. Sad. So how were the interactions with the natives? Well, each colony really interacted with the natives differently. So the British, we'll start with them, they tended to isolate themselves from the natives. They would occasionally trade, but they essentially wanted to keep themselves just completely isolated. The French are going to form very strong bonds with the natives. We're going to see this come out during the French and Indian War, which of course is a weird name for a war because the French and Native Americans were on the same side, and there were Native Americans on the British side too. Well, we'll be getting to that soon. The Spanish, unfortunately, are going to exploit them, making them work and essentially enslaving them. And that's where we start to see the native populations decrease. They will decrease. I cannot stress that enough. The diseases that these white settlers brought over are going to be, deadly to these natives, and it's going to wipe out huge amounts of their people. As well as, again, the way they were treated. It's very, very horrible. Now, these are pictures from Jamestown. They do have a Powhatan village set up, and it's great. It's awesome to go in and see essentially like how their culture is still there. And there are still Powhatan Native Americans, people with that blood in the area, which is great. So, moving along a little bit here, they start to become bigger and bigger, this colony. Why? Because tobacco. Again, the king loves making money. So the colony would now start to have a little bit of leeway, a little bit of rights. So they have a lot of reforms that encourage people to move to Jamestown to help it grow. First, they have the right to elect its own lawmaking body. And again, right there is the House of Burgesses, right there, which is an incredible sight if you ever go ahead and go to Williamsburg. That's where it is. Now, the people are going to go ahead and elect the representatives called Burgesses, and the whole assembly was going to be called the Virginia House of Burgesses. This is the first representative government we really have here in North America, which is pretty incredible. Again, new settlers who bought shares in the company are going to be promised what they call head rights, which is 50 acres of land. So essentially, remember, Jamestown's founded by a Virginia company. If they go ahead and they were, bought shares of that company, they were stockholders, essentially, as we call them today. Again, didn't have stocks back then, but essentially the same thing here. They were entitled to have head rights. Again, 50 acres of land. And at first, they had indentured servants. However, in 1619, we have our first known Africans start to arrive from these slave ships. It's sad to see, but very true. Again, this starts the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade is absolutely horrendous. And this is something we, as a country, as we start to evolve and become eventually into the United States here, this is something that we had to face, this dark past. So again, we see that the Africans, usually on the West Coast, a lot of times actually other African tribes would enslave African tribes and then sell them and, well, go ahead and bring them over to the colonies that wanted slaves. It really was because of the high demand for labor. That's the reason why the slave trade really became a thing. We started to get with tobacco, these huge plantations, these essentially estates where their cash crop was sugarcane, tobacco, and grown on huge scales. And the only way they would be able to go ahead and keep up is, of course, to have free labor. There was a shortage of labor, and that's kind of why they had to look towards Africa. They'd first used Native Americans as workers, but European diseases had killed millions of them. Africans were more resilient to European diseases, as Europeans had already interacted with Africa for a while before we were here in North America. So they've grown immune, if you will, to a lot of the Europeans' diseases. Indentured servants are going to be too expensive. So they're going to say, hey, you don't want to pay them, so why don't we have free labor? And of course, unfortunately, Africa is going to provide that labor. And this also sparks the triangular trade. This is a trading network that lasts for over 200 years, carrying goods from basically goods and enslaved people between Europe, the Americas, and of course Africa. And you can see here in the map all the different things. Each country, unfortunately, would help each other out. So again, the guns, iron, beer, cloth, things like that would go to Africa. They'd be traded for, also for Africans to go ahead and be enslaved. They would usually go into the Caribbean first, and then they'd come up into the East Coast. And then, of course, coming out of there, we would have things like, molasses, tobacco, lumber, and all that coming from here over to England. So, and one thing to notice is you probably notice the triangular trade. It's like a triangle almost. See? It's almost like a triangle. So I hope you remember that. The Middle Passage is pretty horrible, as you can see. That's the passage from essentially the voyage from the enslaved Africans from Africa over here to the West Indies and to North America, again along that Atlantic Ocean. What we see is that they are packed in very inhumane ways. They are treated less than human, unfortunately. It's horrible, and yes, many did die along the way. In fact, 10 to 20% of Africans on average are going to die on the voyage. It's sad. It's horrible. The journey lasted around 3 to 6 weeks, and when they docked, what we see is families get split up at auctions. They're obviously adolescent males, because they're going to be working out in the fields, that are healthy and are in good shape. Between the ages of 18 to 25, they're going to be the most prized, if you will, the most expensive. Women are prized because obviously they could reproduce and add more to their master's wealth. It's a horrible system that started here, unfortunately. Again, they're going to be working not in just plantations, but in also mines, towns, along the countryside as well. Women are going to perform more or less domestic duties, such as being house servants, cooking, things like that. What are the effects? Well, the Atlantic slave trade continued for 400 years. We're going to have 15 to 20 million Africans shipped to America against their will, and that the labor of African slaves are going to help build the American colonies, but again, at what cost, right? Again, as you can see in this right here, there's these huge social impacts because of slavery that are even felt to this day. Now, the northern colonies, we're going to talk about our being local here. First, you have John Winthrop, who goes ahead and leads a whole group of Puritans to Massachusetts, and just 5 years after the Pilgrims had already settled in 1620. So, the Puritans are going to face a lot of different persecution to King Charles. Puritans are very strict in their ways, very strict with any type of vices such as drinking, dancing, things like that. So they were facing a lot of economic hardship. They were facing a ton of persecution. In the end, because of the big decline in the England's wool industry with the sheep, within 25 years, about 20,000 new settlers are going to leave there, come here for some religious freedom between the years of 1620 to 1645. 20,000 is pretty decent. They grew. And of course, gotta talk about Plymouth Colony here in Massachusetts, again founded by this group of separatists called Pilgrims, seeking religious freedom in 1620. They're going to be better known as Pilgrims, as we know. They're going to sail on the very famous Mayflower ship, right? Everyone knows the Mayflower. There's a replica of it right in Plymouth, which is pretty cool. So while on the Mayflower, they write the Mayflower Compact. Now, the Mayflower Compact is this legal document that became the representative government to benefit their colony. And when you read through it, you're going to see that that's exactly what the goal was. It was made to benefit the colony, that everyone had a role and that it was representative. So the Pilgrims and the Puritans are these two groups that are, we kind of group them together. They're very similar in some ways, but at the same time, they are different. Now, both of these groups are going to leave England for religious reasons. Pilgrims were what we call separatists. They wanted to separate from the Church of England, and Puritans wanted to more or less purify the Church of England. The Church of England was something that was made under Henry VIII, who was a king, a monarch in England, who kind of tossed out Catholicism and in exchange to divorce his wife, which he had, 6 wives at the end. It's one of those things where that's kind of where their group had come from, yet they wanted to, in some cases, separate from the church, or they wanted to purify the church. So that's really the difference between the two. So the Mayflower Compact, getting back to that important document that the Pilgrims went ahead and created, it's going to be signed before going ashore in Massachusetts. And the document really was that agreement of the people of the settlement would elect a leader and follow these rules to benefit the colony as a whole. They gave structure before they even set foot on land, and they didn't really set foot on Plymouth Rock. That's just a touristy thing. So cool to see though. All right, now we've got Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. So we're kind of going a few years ahead now. So Nathaniel Bacon is a very, very famous person for what goes down in Jamestown. He wanted the governor to protect the farmers and from the Indians who were attacking their villages. Again, this is the point where definitely the relations between the Native Americans and the settlers were definitely breaking down. And so Nathaniel Bacon goes ahead, being a poor frontiersman, was pretty upset that the colony was run by these rich guys who, were in the House of Burgesses, who didn't care about their problems. And so he goes ahead and leads a group of armed men and attacked all the Native American tribes that were nearby. That was pretty insane for him to do. It was horrible. Again, what Bacon's Rebellion did to these Native Americans. The rebellion does die out almost instantly because, of course, Bacon does die, and when he does, it just kind of like loses its luster. But the issue is that the rebellion showed that people would fight back. The government did not take care of their needs. And we see that this is a plain example of literally the government not going ahead and, taking care of their needs. Again, during this time, we start to have the first Great Awakening. There is a second Great Awakening that's going to happen a little bit later in U.S. history. But here, remember, we're still colonies of the British. So a little bit later on now, 1730, we have this religious revival known as the Great Awakening happening in America. This is going to be led by a bunch of different preachers, including Jonathan Edwards, probably the most famous of them. These guys are, for the most part, never before had average people felt that they could have this personal relationship, personal experience, if you will, of God. And so this leads to this whole sense of spiritual independence. And we see this Great Awakening do encourage some ideas of equality, which is really amazing, and really the importance of the individual. So it is a very important thing to note that, of course, this Great Awakening does go ahead and, awaken people in the colonies to some issues that are going to come up. And essentially, this is going to encourage colonists to kind of question the authority of the British government. This is going to sound familiar, right? And lead to thoughts of independence. So it's it's pretty obvious where this might lead to, right? Considering this is 1730 to 1745. And of course, there's still those churches around today. Those places where you would go ahead, including Jamestown, where a certain teacher that looks oddly familiar, found himself right smack in the middle of the Great Awakening here, the first Great Awakening, to a very lively audience, in fact. Yeah. Moving on. So we're going to talk about Rhode Island, right? Those guys right there. They're right below us there. After many disagreements with the General Court of Massachusetts, Roger Williams, I'm sure you've heard the name, again, Roger Williams Zoo and Roger Williams Park and all that, he goes ahead and says, peace, I'm out. He leaves the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He says he's going to settle his own colony and call it Providence. And to this day, Rhode Island has the longest state name. And you're like, what do you mean? The name is right there on your screen. That is the official name of Rhode Island. It is technically the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. It's true. So others like Anne Hutchinson also are going to disagree with these Puritan leaders Again, remember, Puritans, like I said before, they're very strict, very, very strict. So they're not going to be agreeing with them at all. So they're going to settle areas like Newport, Warwick, Portsmouth, etc. Again, very close to home here too. William Blackstone, or technically it was Blackston, was the name, settled in the Blackstone River Valley in Rhode Island, which again borders right here in Massachusetts, right in Blackstone. And so, of course, these groups are going to be much more tolerant of other religious beliefs than the Puritans. They're going to be a lot more understanding of certain things during this time. So that's why they're going to be very, very popular. Connecticut in 1636, you have Thomas Hooker, who decided, hey, we're going to move his entire congregation to the Connecticut River Valley. And so they founded Connecticut. They chose to move mainly because of a couple things. They needed more land to raise cattle, because again, land is huge for raising cattle. But he also was pretty upset that not everyone should be able to vote, not just church members. He wanted everyone to vote, which is kind of a cool reason to be like, hey, we want equality, representation across everybody, of all walks of life. So pretty cool. We do have the fundamental orders. When in Connecticut, those settlers of Connecticut, they create the fundamental orders of Connecticut, and this is first written, technically the first written constitution in America. It's going to allow all men to vote, not just church members. Now, unfortunately, this is all white men. This unfortunately does not include blacks. It does not include women. It does not include Native Americans. Unfortunately, they have a very long road ahead of them. Unfortunately. So we're going to start to grow even more. And before you know it, we're going to have 13 colonies. By the early 1700s, there's really 3 distinct colonies that have come up, or areas of colonies. You have the northern colonies, which is going to be, what we have here in New England. Small villages, small towns, small farms, port cities, big into trading, big into fishing. You're going to have middle colonies, who are going to be your farmers, your artisans, your merchants, for the most part. And then you're going to have your southern colonies. Those are the ones that are going to be these big plantations, huge tobacco farms, all about growing crops as well. And of course, all colonies had slaves and indentured servants. Again, there were many more slaves in the southern colonies. In fact, our 14th state, which is Vermont, is the first state to have written in its constitution that slavery is not allowed. Technically, there were slaves here in the north. They just were not anywhere near what they had in the south. All right, and that's it. That's what we got for you for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope this helped you out. And again, I'll see you back in the classroom.